Good afternoon. This is Malbert Smith, and welcome to our webinar today. I will be your moderator, and I am the president of MetaMetrics. Today's topic is really all about Every Student Succeeds Act. The title of our webinar is Addressing ESSA Opportunities, Improving Growth, Instruction, and Accountability Through Common Measurement Scales. Our two major presenters and speakers today will be Dr. Terry Holliday and Dr. Gary Williamson. And first, as the moderator, I have to do some housekeeping. And the first housekeeping is our logistics today. If you experience any technical difficulties, please refer to your confirmation email or call 919-886-0019.
Okay.
Number two, submit your questions to all panelists, which can be selected from the drop-down menu in the Q&A panel. Third, a follow-up email containing the full presentation and supporting materials will be sent to all participants that have registered. And finally, the last reminder, friendly reminder, is to please mute your phones. If you're working at your computer in particular, it will pick up on keyboarding and everything else. So we are recording this, so everyone will have an audio transcript of it. So if you could mute your phone. We've scheduled about an hour, and we are going to try to finish within 10 or 15 minutes, so you'll have plenty of time for questions. If we don't address every question, we will address every question in an email back to you if we run out of time. So with that, I want to turn over to today's discussion and frame it. Really, it's about, as I said earlier, Every Student Succeeds Act, and we're really going to walk through two states. We're going to walk through Kentucky and North Carolina. And the first part of our conversation today will be establishing a vision for ESSA, and it's really the Kentucky story. And I'll introduce Dr. Terry Holliday in just a moment, there's no one better to tell the Kentucky story than the person who created the Kentucky story. Secondly, throughout this conversation today, you're going to hear the benefits of using a common scale to measure both student ability and also text complexity in math and as well as in reading. And through this, you'll also see punctuated throughout the presentation, especially on the data part, how Lexile's and Quantile measures have been used to interpret growth across really a 20-year span, allowing you a very long-term longitudinal look back and a look forward that we're pretty excited about. And finally, how Lexile's and Quantile measures can be used to help determine the effects of educational initiatives and policies. You'll see that primarily in Gary Williamson's presentation. So let me briefly introduce Dr. Terry Holliday and Dr. Gary Williamson. Dr. Holliday needs no introduction. Everyone knows Dr. Holliday, but for those who may not, and I will give it very briefly so that we can spend most of the time on the content and not telling you who he is, since all of you already know who he is. But as you know, he was the Commissioner of Kentucky from 2009 to 2015. Under Dr. Holliday's tenure, Kentucky was recognized as a leader in implementing college and career-ready standards, assessment, and accountability. Dr. Holliday was recognized by the National Association of State Boards of Education as the 2014 Policy Leader of the Year, by the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards as the 2015 James Kelly Award recipient, and by the Association of Career and Technical Educators as the 2015 National Champion of the Year. In addition to serving as Commissioner of Education in Kentucky, Dr. Holliday was also a member of the NAGB board from 2010 to 2014. And as all of you know, NAGB is the governing board that sits and resides and makes policy decisions related to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's really an honor to have Terry join us today because there's no one state leader that probably has more insights and has walked in your moccasins better than Dr. Holliday. Our second presenter will be Dr. Gary Williamson. Dr. Williamson is the Senior Research Scientist here at MetaMetrics, where he engages in psychometric research and development in support of public education. Dr. Williamson received his Ph.D. from Stanford in mathematical methods and educational research. In addition to his Ph.D. From Stanford, he holds master's degrees in statistics, educational research and evaluation, and mathematics. His academic specializations include research methodology, statistics, and psychometrics. Currently, his research interests are focused on promoting a lifespan developmental approach to setting academic growth standards for public education, and you'll see that really on display when he shares with you the North Carolina data. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Holliday, who will talk for a few minutes. Then I'll make a few comments, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Gary Williamson. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Holliday. Hold on one second, we may have some technical problems here. Gary?
Yes.
We just turned the podium, if you will, over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Malbert. Thank you for the time today, and thank MetaMetrics for sponsoring this event. If you're listening and working in a state agency, most of your time these days is probably being spent dealing with Every Student Succeeds Act. We are delighted that Congress passed the act, but as state agencies, I bet you're a little nervous about, well, now we have to do this work. Just a quick run through of some of the highlights of ESSA. Those of you very familiar with this know that you still have to continue annual assessments, reading, math, 3 through 8, once in elementary and middle in science, and you have to test once in reading, math, and science at high school level. However, ESSA does give a lot of flexibility. No longer is it just a summative assessment, but you can use a roll-up type of system as long as it meets the peer review, validity, and reliability requirements. Also, 7 states will have the opportunity to develop innovative assessment systems beyond what I just talked about in the first bullet. Also, states now are able to really be innovative in their development of accountability systems, interventions, and student supports focused on the ultimate goal of ESSA, which is college and career readiness for all students. The big challenge for most states over the summer and early fall will be working with stakeholders to develop this system, but also trying to make decisions about what you're going to do, whether or not you're going to continue your educator evaluation and support systems that many states develop under the No Child Left Behind waiver process. What most state chiefs that I talk to are really interested in is the state and local flexibility in the use of federal funds. Now let me address just a couple of the big challenges that ESSA provides to states, but also you should look at these as tremendous opportunities to be really innovative and to use data in meaningful ways that could impact student learning in the long term. One of the first challenges that states will face is how do I set long-term goals for overall students, and then how do I set annual targets for those same students, and then how do I break out those goals and those targets by subgroup? You'll be faced with 2 possibilities. One possibility is that you create aspirational goals like No Child Left Behind is. However, the challenge with that is as you get closer and closer to the date where you're supposed to meet the aspirational goal, you find that the goal is meaningless because they're absolutely impossible to reach that aspirational goal. So many states are looking at where can I find a measure, a valid, reliable, comparable measure that can help me set meaningful goals, stretch our educators and students to meet those goals, and use those goals and targets in our accountability model to meaningfully differentiate between the performance of schools. Another key challenge in ESSA will be that there'll be lots of different state assessments used, and if states are using a roll-up type of model, a formative and summative model, rather than just a summative assessment, is the assessment my state is using, how is it comparable to other states? How is it comparable to my previous assessments? Is this a valid and reliable assessment? And are the measures that come out of this assessment something that parents and educators and teachers can use in the schools? The other huge challenge that we found over the years, especially with the teacher evaluation methodology, is that most people do not understand the state growth models. Whether you're using value add, student growth percentile, or some other type of growth model, these growth models have been very difficult to explain to teachers, to parents, and to your communities. So this will be something that states could choose for their high schools in ESSA, but we'll be using for grades 3 through 8. So what measures could you possibly use to establish a growth model that makes sense to people? And finally, what ESSA is all about, college and career-ready goals. How could you set meaningful goals with meaningful measures? We've done a pretty good job the last few years in defining college readiness by saying what it takes to be academically prepared to enter a credit-bearing course. But research and the practitioners are lagging far behind on career-ready goals. We know nationally through the Council of Chief State School Officers, tremendous work is going on in our states right now. So it is critical to connect the career-ready work going on in our state with the ESSA challenges for setting career-ready goals. Now, as many of you know, when I was in Kentucky, the No Child Left Behind waiver process started, and many states moved forward with that to perhaps lay the groundwork for the new Every Student Succeeds Act. Some of the critical pieces as we were working in Kentucky toward a more reasonable and more useful accountability model were things like parent-friendly measures. How could you find measures that when a parent got the annual test scores or they got those formative assessments that the schools were using, how could parents make sense of those results? Well, we found that by using the Lexiles and Quantiles, we were able to connect to powerful resources that made sense to parents. It was a normal occurrence for me to be meeting with parents and talking about their students, and parents to talk about the Lexile performance of their students. So we had programs like Find the Book, where parents could use the Lexile measures and go online and find books for their students during the summer reading program. Math at Home, an excellent program to help parents know what quantile level of resources that they might utilize with their students at home to support teachers and to improve student learning. Perhaps the most critical issue is how do teachers use the data from formative and summative assessments to make instructional decisions? How do they sit down in their professional learning communities and look at the data and make sense of it? Well, annual summative assessments give you one snapshot, but what teachers are looking for are those connections throughout the year with formative measures, formative assessments, their own instructional learning. So what we provided teachers with was a lot of professional development and support and resources on how to utilize Lexiles and Quantiles. And then we hooked up with textbook companies and resources that teachers would utilize online to encourage all of the providers to map their resources to the Lexiles and Quantiles. Nothing's more powerful than a PLC sitting around and talking about what resources in math should we utilize this week to help meet kids where they currently are performing and to improve them to the next level. So utilizing those Lexiles and Quantiles for instructional decision making is perhaps the most important lever for improving student performance over time. Then the comparability, like in Kentucky, we were very early in establishing Common Core standards and assessments tied to Common Core standards, but we really didn't have any comparability to other tests in other states. However, with the use of Lexiles and Quantiles, and with the expansion of the number of national assessments that are linked to Lexiles and Quantiles, we were able to make those connections and to assure that our student and subgroup growth and our actual performance on our state assessments was connected to college and career readiness, and these measures were comparable to other states and other national measures. Finally, in Kentucky, we worked real hard with our accountability model and with our higher ed, our business community to clearly establish understandable college measures. What does it mean to be academically prepared to take a credit-bearing course? And what does it mean to be academically ready and technically ready to enter a career that pays a living wage? What we were missing very early on was the true connection to what reading level would this career be on, say, auto mechanics, HVAC, those kinds of things. And with the help of the Lexiles database, we were able to set clear pathways and define the technical reading level, technical math level, at the most important career pathways in our state needed. And this provides states with an excellent opportunity to set those career-ready goals based on actual research tied back to the actual industry. So, in conclusion, I know states that you're challenged with ESSA right now and how to do this work and how to move this work forward. If the Kentucky story highlights anything, it highlights the ability of using measures like Lexiles and Quantiles to tie back to comparability, but more important, to give parents, educators, and students meaningful information that can make a difference in instruction and eventually student performance. So thank you for the opportunity to tell and brag a little bit more about Kentucky. A lot of great work still going on in Kentucky, and they're continuing this work to this day. Thank you, Malbert.
Thank you, Terry. As we transition to Gary, I think what you're going to see in Gary's presentation is a lot of the principles that Terry talked about, you're going to actually see displayed with real data from North Carolina over a 20-year time period. And just a couple of points. I think for a lot of you this is redundant, but having said that, one of the reasons why we're able to take these different perspectives is that our frameworks are built on what's called a conjoint measurement model. That is, not only can we measure people's ability on math or reading, but we also can measure text and mathematical skills and put it on the same scale, which really makes it actual. Now those test scores, as Terry was talking about, there's something you can do with it. You can go find a book, you can find math resources, you can connect to the public library. In fact, in Kentucky, they had a huge summer reading program that we launched with Terry and his staff, and we actually did a public TV and public broadcast, and we were on NPR, all getting the message out to parents to take action on those test scores going home and to combat summer loss. And another point that Gary will make, and also that was made in Dr. Holliday's comments, was Lexiles and Quantiles allow you a metric for measuring growth. You're going to see in some of Gary's work, not only can you measure growth from year to year, but across years. Not just the adjacent years, but how much growth is needed to go from the 3rd grade to the 5th grade to the 7th grade. And so when you take that kind of perspective, you take more of a longitudinal perspective, we're all in this together. It's not just the 3rd graders, teachers that are responsible, the 4th graders, every teacher is responsible. And the last point, and obviously ESSA is all about college and career readiness, and not only did Dr. Holliday talk about that, but we know now from the work we've done how well you have to read for a range of occupations and careers. So I love Stephen Covey's work. One of his core principles for effective leadership is begin with the end in mind. Well, we know in terms of Lexiles and Quantiles where students need to be college and career ready, and so you're going to see that punctuated through Dr. Williamson's comments. So I'm going to turn it over to you to share the North Carolina data and the work that you've done.
Thank you, Malvern. Having grown up in North Carolina and spent most of my career working in the North Carolina public schools, I'm pleased to be able to share this information about North Carolina's growth over a 20-year period. This time frame runs from 1995 to 2014, and we're going to talk about an example that will overlay some policy actions and other events that took place during the time frame. That's the first example I'll talk about today, but I have two others. Another example will show you how it's possible to combine in a single picture 5 different perspectives, including student growth, student achievement standards, and takes complexity requirements for K-12, post-secondary, and occupations. And then those first two examples will focus on reading primarily, but then in the third example, I'm going to show you a new way of generating norms for growth, and I'm talking about growth rates, norms for growth rates, for both reading and mathematics. So without further delay, let's go ahead and start the first example. I want to spend just a couple of minutes telling you how I think about growth. I take a long-term view, and it's based on longitudinal data. This first picture sort of illustrates this. These dots that you see in this graph represent the reading measures for students across grades 3 through 8. Now, this could be an individual student, but it happens to be the case that these are average scores for a group of students in North Carolina, but the key is it's the same students on each occasion. So we follow the same students across grades 3 through 8. Their grade is on the horizontal axis of the chart, and the Lexile measure that reports their student reading ability is on the vertical axis. This is a particularly interesting group because it's a group of students who progress from grade to grade without repeating a grade, and they have complete data. There's about 68,000 of them. I thought it'd be interesting to look at students who have complete data and who spent their entire 3 through 8 experience in North Carolina schools, because that would give me some sense of how students grow when they really experience the full impact of schools in North Carolina. In this picture, these students were third graders in 1999, and they progressed from grade to grade so that they were 8th graders in 2004. Now, what I typically do to summarize growth is to fit a statistical model, and it results in a curve that summarizes the trajectory that the students are on. Once that's done, I kind of forget about the particular observed scores. If the model's a good fit, then the curve tells me the things I most want to know about the growth. And the curve allows me to make inferences about the magnitude of the achievement on each occasion, but it also tells me about the growth velocity. If you imagine a tangent to the curve at any time point, the slope of that tangent is the growth rate at that point in time. And also the formula for the quadratic model that's fit here has buried within it a summary of the acceleration, or in this case, deceleration associated with growth. So having looked at the growth curve, you can infer those 3 things: magnitude, velocity, and acceleration. And of course, if you can do it for one group of students, you can do it for multiple groups of students. This table summarizes 15 successive groups of students. Most of them are going to run from grades 3 through 8. There are 3 groups that will be tracked from grades 3 through 10 or 11, and those are further down the table. The main point I want to make today about this table, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but the main point I want to make is in the bottom right corner. You'll notice that collectively these analyses reflect the growth of over 1 million students in North Carolina over this 20-year time frame. So here's the summary. Let me spend just a moment or two describing this. Now, along the horizontal axis, I have put year instead of grade. And the reason I can do that is that every growth curve spans grades 3 through 8. They just do it in different subsets of years. And you can see in the legend what the years are for each different group of students. I call these panels because they're based on the same students over time. Each curve is based on the same students over time, but the 15 successive curves are 15 different groups of students across time in different years. And they are ordered chronologically. The earliest is the curve on the left, and they go from group to group across the 15 groups, the most recent group being the last one on the right. And again, the Lexile measures on the vertical axis. There are some things you can immediately see about the growth in North Carolina. You can see that it's been very consistent across time. It has the same functional form across time. And the beginning, or the lower end of the curve, each curve represents the average performance of students in that panel at the end of third grade. And at the upper end of each curve, you've got the average performance at the end of eighth grade. So the length of the curve represents the total amount of growth from grades 3 to 8. And you can see that the beginning points of the curves were initially kind of flat, then they experience a period of increase, they level off, they increase some more, level off again, and drop back a little. And on the upper end, you see that the eighth grade was improving across time, then about midway through this sequence, it declines a little bit, and then it increases again. So those are the overarching things you can notice, and I will now overlay some other interpretive considerations. And let's start with these three threads. I'm going to talk about events related to assessment in North Carolina and also accountability initiatives in North Carolina and early intervention policies in North Carolina. Now, I have to pause to make one little bit of a disclaimer. This slide is also conspicuous for what it does not list. In the presentation, I'm not going to consider other possible causal events that took place in North Carolina, such as innovations in the curriculum or instruction during this time frame. Also, I want to address potentially relevant national policy initiatives in which North Carolina participated, such as America Reads or the Reading Excellence Act, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, No Child Left Behind, etc. Although I am going to offer some thoughts on possible causal hypotheses, they're limited to North Carolina accountability and early intervention initiatives. So for that reason, I must emphasize that what I present is not a demonstration of cause and effect. Rather, I'm merely illustrating how one might identify potential causal hypotheses that could be relevant to interpreting growth and performance in North Carolina. And I should add that any state who goes to the trouble to document their growth in this way would have the same opportunity to overlay events and actions that took place in their own state. So let's start with assessment. There were 4 editions of assessment across this 20-year time period for the grades 3 through 8. And I just call them the integrated editions 1, 2, 3, and then the 4th one is called NC Ready. The striking thing to me about the picture is that we can present a consistent, common functional form for growth across this time frame, even though these 4 editions of tests had different scales initially when developed. The reason we can put them all into this common picture is because North Carolina linked Edition 1 to the Lexile Framework. It also linked Edition 3 and 4 to the Lexile Framework. It did not directly link Edition 2, but it was linked to the adjacent editions through a between-edition linking study that was done in the state. So we're able to bring all the scores from all these editions onto one common scale, in this case, the Lexile scale. So next we'll talk about accountability. I've put a lot up all in one fell swoop here. There have been several waves of accountability in North Carolina. In the early 90s, there was something called Senate Bill 2, which was a district-level accountability program. Around 1995-96, the state decided that they would like to extend their accountability to the school level. So the variations among schools would be more easily identified. So they piloted a program they called the ABCs, which focused on school level accountability and set growth expectations for individual schools. The pilot went well, so they implemented it in 1996-97, and the first generation of growth formulas that were used up through 2005. Then there was a revision, the next part of the time frame was the what I call the second generation of the ABCs, which went out to about 2002, and then the NC Ready 2012, then NC Ready came in 2013. Also, during this time frame, the state board enacted a policy for student accountability. The policy was devised in 1999 and was structured in such a way that the requirements for students became active in subsequent years, and in particular, the requirements for grades 3 and 8 students became effective in 2002. Now, having laid all that out, I want to point out some things about the growth and how the growth seems to mirror some of these instances. For example, if you'll notice when the ABCs was implemented in 1997, if you look down to the lower parts of the growth curves, you'll notice that there's a little bit of an improvement in grade 3 performance over what it was in 95 and 96, and it continues to improve for several years and then levels off some. You'll notice that there's another jump in third grade performance when the student level accountability standards went into effect in 2002 relative to the sort of level third grade performance that was exhibited from 99 through 2001. At the upper end, you see increasing performance for 8th graders, particularly once the student accountability standards went into effect. So there's some interesting correspondences there with the accountability initiatives over time and student growth. Next, I want to overlay several layers of early intervention initiatives in North Carolina. In 1993, a program was enacted by the General Assembly, and it was called Smart Start, and it was to direct resources to 4-year-olds so that they would be better prepared when they entered schooling. And if you think about that first group of students who were 4-year-olds in 1993, they would have been 5-year-olds or kindergartners in 94. And then in 95, 96, 97, they'd been in grades 1, 2, and 3. So they would start matriculating into third grade in the 1996-97 school year. And when they were tested at the end of 1997, this happens to be the time when the ABC standards were also beginning to be in effect, and you see this increase in third grade performance. So possible multiple influences there from the accountability system, the setting of growth expectations, and the filtering in of students who've gotten some extra help as 4-year-olds before they actually come into schooling. And then you'll notice that by 1998, the Spark Start was deployed in 55 counties. And if you imagine what it would look like for the 4-year-olds in 1998, when would they matriculate? If you count across, you're at 4-year-olds in 98, 5-year-olds in 99, then grades 1, 2, and 3. Finally, in 2002, these students from these 55 counties would start impacting the third grade performance there in the same year that the student accountability standards took effect, and you see the increase in the third grade performance there. And then finally, Smart Start was fully deployed by 2001, and also a new program or initiative called More at 4 was overlaid on top of it. And if you imagine when those students matriculate and count across, you'll arrive to the point of about 2005, and you see that that's one of the higher in this long sequence of curves up to that point in time. It's the highest third grade performance that we've seen in these multiple curves. And so that kind of summarizes some influences and some features of growth that we see in North Carolina over time. Finally, that panel in 2005 happens to also be the first panel with statewide exposure to early intervention. And you notice it's a somewhat longer curve. And that's partly, I think, maybe due to this fact that we have now a full population that's experienced early intervention. But it's also partly an indication of a methodological difference. The first 10 panels were based on going through edition 1 and that Lexile link. The last 5 were based on going through edition 3 and that Lexile link. The reason there's a difference is because the state used a different between edition equating methodology when they equated edition 2 to 3 compared to when they equated edition 1 to 2. And I think the remarkable thing about this is that this exercise of putting things on a common scale helps us to identify this impact of that methodological change. It's something we would probably never have seen or noticed otherwise. Okay, I'm going to skip across the next 2 or 3 channels. They show about additional growth in hospitals, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go to the second major example and talk about this chart that brings into focus 5 different perspectives. And this this figure that I'm going to describe appears in the Educational Standard, which is a policy journal for the National Association of State Boards of Education. And it's striking because of the fact that I use conjoint measurement and a common scale to bring 5 different perspectives into one picture. I can show student growth. I can show the achievement level standards in an absolute frame of reference. I can show K-12 text complexity standards. I can also show post-secondary text complexity reading requirements and the difficulty of reading materials associated with a group of careers. All right, so let me start with the 3 of the aspects, the text complexity parts of the picture. If you'll notice the dashed boundaries on the left side of the graph, those represent the range of text complexity in the range of grades 3 through 12, and these are aligned with college and career readiness reading requirements, and these are the boundaries that were essentially incorporated into Appendix A of the Common Core, representing the Lexile ranges of the aligned text complexity requirements or text complexity standards. The box that's graphed at about grade 13 represents a large collection of post-secondary reading materials that we have measured over the years. From 2,000 or more materials were measured, and what's exhibited there in the box is the middle 50%. It's called the interquartile range. It shows you from the 25th to the 75th percentile of all of those reading materials, and the diamond in the center represents the midpoint or the median. The diamond is at 1,300 Lexiles, and the box ranges from 1,200 to 1,380 Lexiles. And so this is a summary of the typical post-secondary reading materials, and it spans universities, community colleges, trade schools, the workplace, the military, and it also includes citizenship materials. It includes featured articles from Wikipedia, and it includes English international newspapers. So there's a very broad range of materials here representing a diversity of post-secondary reading materials that a student might well encounter within 3 months of leaving high school. And then the individual dots out to the right represent the median text difficulty of reading materials for 59 occupations, and these are called Bright Outlook occupations by ONET, which is an online career exploration website. And they are graphed according to their Lexile measure, median Lexile measure, and also the years of required education. So you'll see dots at grades 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20 corresponding to high school diploma, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctor's degree. One little feature I should mention is that the dot at grade 12 actually represents 17 different occupations, and those are occupations that only require a high school diploma. And so we use the 11th and 12th grade median textbooks, national textbooks, as examples of median reading material associated with high school text. The other dots for the other careers represent materials we actually collected either from career preparation or certification program materials or from professional websites where material was disseminated about the careers. So given that context, we can look at text complexity across grades 3 through 12 and on out into the future as far as the attainment of a doctoral degree. And next I want to show the achievement level standards that North Carolina State Board of Education adopted over the years with different test editions. The lowest level corresponds to the first edition, and you'll see a sequence of 6 hash marks in blue. I hope the blue shows up. It's a little faded on my screen here. But the lowest level of hash marks represents the grade level or proficiency cut point for the first edition of end of grade test. The next set up, the dark purple hash marks represent the level 3 or grade level proficiency cut points for the third edition. And then the last 2 sets represent the cut points on the latest edition. North Carolina had a 4-level system in editions 1 through 3. And when they moved to NC Ready they adopted 5 levels, 5 achievement levels, and what's shown here are the 3rd and the 4th, which are called North Carolina Ready, Sufficient, and Solid. And the point I would like to make here is that standards have raised quite a bit over the years. If you look from the first edition to the most recent 4th edition, you can see a 200 to 300 Lexile increase across that 20-year time frame. And another thing I would point out is that the standards for the most recent edition are now very well aligned with the upper boundary of the Common Core text complexity standards, and also, therefore, well aligned with the post-secondary reading requirements, at least those that would face the students immediately after high school. Now, finally, I want to put in the student growth side of the picture. These are 2 of the growth curves that I showed earlier. The lowest one is the very first one, and then it runs from grade 3 to 8, and then the second one, the higher growth curve, is one of the more recent ones that runs through grade 11. And you can see that there's been a fairly large increase in student performance over this 20-year time frame, too, and that the 2 growth curves are more or less parallel, but the more recent curve can now be extended out through grade 11, whereas early on, grade 8 was as far as we could go. So I always make a caution here. We're not claiming that merely raising achievement level standards causes student performance and growth to increase. On the other hand, when you raise achievement level standards, you do a lot of other things to help support and sustain student achievement and growth. And those are the things that would be behind this picture. And again, any state would have access to this kind of context with the text complexity and with the appropriate measurements and assessments in place. You could do these growth curves over a long period of time and get this same kind of picture. The last example I want to show is the example of a new kind of growth norm, and I'll start with reading. This table represents what I call incremental velocity norms, and this is for average reading growth, and it's based on 101,610 students in North Carolina who were tracked from grade 3 to 11, and their performance on the end of grade in grades 3 through 8, plus their performance in the high school years on the end of course, and others were included here. And there's a model with an equation behind it. It's shown in the footnote. And from that growth curve model, you can write the predicted averages at each point in time, which is what you see along the top row in the table. And then beneath that, you see the differences for every pair of time points or grades. And the numbers in the diagonal, which are shaded, represent the year-to-year gain demonstrated by this panel of students as they progressed from grade 3 to 11. And this is in the years from 2002 to 2010. And you'll see that the growth from third to fourth, into third grade to into fourth grade was 139 lexiles. And the growth decreases by grade as you go up, and it's about 17 lexiles between the end of grade 10 and the end of grade 11. So those are spring-to-spring velocity norms, if you will, or growth norms based on this panel of 101,000 students. The nice thing about this table particularly is the fact that those norms are all based on the same students. There have been other instances of this kind of thing done before, but usually it's with pairwise groups. So you might have one group of students tracked from 3 to 4, another group from 4 to 5, and so on. But this is the same group across the whole time frame. The second thing that's striking about this table, I think, is the fact that you can infer the growth for any pair of grades. So if you're a middle school principal, for example, and you have grade 6 to 8 in your school, you'd be interested in knowing how much growth would be expected or would be typical across those 3 years. So from the end of grade 5 to the end of grade 8, if you access the table in the row for grade 5 and you read across to the column for grade 8, you'll see that 260 lexiles is the amount of growth that those students would experience in those 3 years. If you go to the upper right-hand table in the corner, you can also see the total amount of gain across all of the grades. From the end of grade 3 to the end of grade 11, it was 624 lexiles. So this table encourages a long-term view. It lets you know not only the year-to-year gains, but the gains across any pair of grades, that would allow you to compare any institutional organization as well as the growth across the entire time frame. And the final point is that this kind of analysis is available for mathematics as well. There's a picture here for a group of students, 101,650 students, with mathematics scores across grades 3 through 8 from the North Carolina intergrade. And then in the high schools, scores from Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. This is in the time frame 2002 to 2010, before the NC Ready 4th edition was implemented. But you'll note again, the diagonal entries represent the year-to-year gains, and they do decrease also across grade level, not quite as dramatically as the reading gains. And then you've got the off-diagonal elements that do the gains between any pair of grades. And that wraps it up for my portion.
Thank you, Gary. And I'll pause here. If you have a question, submit to the all panel. You can pull down the menu there, and we'll wait here for a few moments. We will be sending out, just as a reminder, a link to this webinar with an audio tape as well. If you don't have questions now but have questions later, if you'll submit them, we'll make sure that we get back an email response to you quickly. And I want to thank Dr. Holliday, Dr. Williamson, for sharing with us today the information. And I'm going to hold here for a moment to see if there are any questions coming. Is there a question? Okay. Yes, there's quite. Let me repeat the question. And Gary, I'm going to start with you on this. Is there any evidence for why the growth slows over time? Is this a given is this given expected for all learners?
That's a great question, and I don't have a complete answer, but I have some thoughts about it. On the reading side, we know, for example, I know from my reading colleagues over the years that we tend to teach reading and reading skills in the early grades, and then we expect students to change from reading to learn to learning to read. And so we don't actually teach reading so much in the middle and high school grades. So that's possible. That's one possible explanation. Is that the instruction and the curriculum does not continue to sustain new strategies for reading skills. And that's been kind of confirmed in looking at the North Carolina Standard Courses study. In the early grades, it talks about used to talk about using skills and strategies to read, write, and comprehend. And around 6th grade, it switched to wording like use personal perspective and synthesis to communicate. So there's a little bit of difference in the way the construct was expected to be manifested. That could be part of it. And the fact that it's not a focus of instruction in the higher grades. And it's also possible that this is a natural developmental feature of growth. If you think about physical growth, we know that growth is rapid at some parts of the lifespan and slows down at other parts of the lifespan. We have a growth spurt in the adolescent years. We don't see any evidence of that in our reading measures or math measures yet, but we don't tend to measure as frequently either as folks do on the physical side for height. On the math side, I think the fact that there's less deceleration is probably attributable to the fact that math is sort of cumulative, and it continues to be emphasized as you go up through the years. And so those are my thoughts. There are probably other hypotheses you could.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I agree, Gary, that I think part of it's the developmental trajectory. If you find this mimics whether you're talking about measurement of height, weight, or almost any human dimension. I do think the good news is, while the growth rate may slow, I think growth continues. And as a 63-year-old individual now, it's one of the few things I can still improve on. I can't jump as high as I used to. I can't run as fast. But vocabulary and reading, I can continue to grow my skills. And I'm reading a fascinating book right now by Erickson, who did most of the work on deliberate practice. in peak performance, and where he talks about this deliberate practice and actually improving one's reading in any cognitive domain. So, good question.
I might add one more point, too. I think the reason we don't see more growth later is because we cease to measure it also. Especially if we can measure it, so on average, with the first year and into the post-secondary year.
Okay. We will, it's 12:52. I'll wait another minute here to see if there's any other questions. I don't think anyone will be upset that we finished 7 minutes early. We will email you again a link to the site, and I really want to. I know one of the most, and your time is so valuable, and I know how busy all of you are. So to spend this hour with us, I am very appreciative. And again, I want to thank Dr. Holliday and Dr. Williamson for being with us today and sharing with us not only the Kentucky story but the North Carolina story. And we will follow up with you. And that is we will close here. All right, thank you.